Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of the Be Freaking Awesome podcast. I am one of your hosts, Sami Kinnison, joined by Angela Belford. Today, we're going to be talking about friendship. We're actually going to do a two-part series, 2 episodes, 2 conversations. I don't know, however we want to talk about it. We're going to talk about friendship twice. How about that? Today, specifically, we want to talk about how to make friends as an adult. But before we jump into the episode, Angela, do you want to talk to us a little bit about why we're going to talk about this?
Yes, I would say over the last 3 or 4 months, I have been in a number of group settings where people start talking about what's going on with their life and have heard more than once, like more times than that it started to get a little bit alarming. People saying, I'm lonely and I don't know how to make friends. I don't have any friends. I don't know if they would say, I don't know how to make friends, but they would say, I don't have any friends and I don't know how to fix that, is kind of how more they would say it. And so after hearing that multiple times, I was like, I know I'm an extrovert, but I remember back in 2012, 13, 14, I was working with my coach, Kim Hodis, and one of the things on my wheel of life that was low was friends and family. And I realized I just didn't have a lot of friends. And at that point, I was very, very busy with little kids and I had to be super intentional. And one of the goals that I set was more girlfriend time, which is not a very good SMART goal, but it's a great grand goal because it's like an intention that I set in my life to try to incorporate that. And when I did that, what it did is that then whenever I would have cool interactions with people, I would go to coffee or I would just have a nice conversation at a networking event. I was like, oh, yay, more girlfriend time. Yay. And so the more success I got, the more success I got. And it helped me. And so having come through that season of my life, and then now hearing, I think especially post-pandemic, people are like struggling to reestablish those, some of our friendships. And so I wanted to talk about it.
I also think in some weird ways, there are some people that are not struggling post-pandemic with friendships. And so then when we are like looking around and you're like, wow, there are some people out there that are just like have tons of friends and are really killing it. What am I doing wrong? Like, what's wrong with me? Like your brain then starts to ask all of these other questions of like, is it me? Am I the problem? And I don't think that's true. And I also think it's very normal that our brain is asking these questions and trying to figure out what's going on, trying to make sense of the things happening. And so there are tangible things that you can do and you can decide to take action on.
Absolutely. I think that is probably the first step. Of course, in Be Freaking Awesome, that is the first step of everything. And I don't know why it's not the first step in the second book, but in the first book, first step, make a decision. Like, as you listen to this episode and you say, oh, yeah, I do need to know how to make friends. Like, you first have to set the intention that you want to make friends. And we talk a lot about nervous system on the podcast. And so immediately I imagine people that are like, oh, yeah, I'm going to set the intention. I'm going to make friends. And you're like, nervous system is like, that sounds scary. Fear of rejection. Oh, my gosh. Like, yeah, that's real. Okay, take a deep breath. Yep. Because when you take a deep breath, you can send the message to your nervous system. This is not as scary as it looks. I would say some of the time, Jack Canfield's definition of rejection works, and this might be one of them. So he says that there's no such thing as rejection. You don't have friends now. If you ask somebody to be your friend and they say no, then you still don't have a friend. I think that's a little bit of a simplified version, but it can help you have just a little bit of courage. And so if you can mind meld your brain, trick your brain into having just a little bit of courage by being like, oh, well, I don't have a friend now. If they say no, I won't have any friends later. Nothing changed. The only thing that'll change is what I make that mean.
Right. Well, and sort of on that note, though, of what we might make that mean or what our brain might tell us, I do want to take a pause to acknowledge that it's not always easy.
Mm-mm.
And it can come with really heavy and frankly painful emotions. And that loneliness is not just like, oh, whatever, like I'm lonely, do, let's keep going. No, like there is real pain within that. And there is real hurt that you might be facing. And we don't want to not acknowledge that in this conversation.
100%.
And we want to just take a moment to say, like, I see you. I see that this is hard. And if we can take a moment to make a decision, we could do something about it. You know, you could decide not to do anything, then it probably won't get any better on its own if you don't decide to do anything. And so even within that pain, do you want to keep feeling that pain, or do you want to maybe try something different? And if you want to try something different, we have some thoughts and ideas for you.
Yeah, because there are certain types of pain where you do have to, like, you have to learn to work through and live with that, right? We've had an episode on grief. We're planning another one coming up. And there's an elements of grief where you have to learn to live with that pain. And I feel like loneliness is a pain you don't have to learn to live with. I feel like there are strategies that you can take, strategies you can implement to be able to begin to alleviate that pain. And so I am a huge believer in freedom and hope that this episode can help people get some freedom.
I love it. Let's jump in. Angela, do you have any, we already mentioned deciding. We've talked about like sort of step one, decide to try do something about it. Other ideas? What's your next thought on how to make friends as an adult?
I would say that the next step, and this is actually pre-step, sort of like deciding, and that is that you're going to decide in advance what it means. Like if you ask somebody to coffee and they say no, or they don't have time, like decide in advance that just means they're really busy, because your brain will offer you, oh, there's something wrong with you. Nobody loves you. All of these silliness that is not silly, that's painful, but is really not true. And so decide, I'm just going to ask. And so I've read a statistic or a quote, whatever, this week that was like, most people don't smile first. 90% of the people don't smile first. Almost everyone smiles back. And so the first step could be as simple as smiling at people, like smiling at the person that is handing you coffee at the coffee shop, smiling at the person that is checking you out at the register. Because when you smile, you've offered someone a gift, because you've actually offered them the opportunity to be seen, right? And when you offer a gift, they reciprocate. I think there is a law, Sami?
Yes.
Communication.
Yeah, definitely.
We're going to drop some communication theory on us.
The norm of reciprocity, definitely us communication nerds and other like psychology nerds and things like that, really into it. But the idea of people are more likely to reciprocate whatever it is that you put forward. So if you put forward a smile, people are likely to reciprocate that. If you come in really angry and really hot and like yelling at your barista at the coffee shop before they've even done anything to you, they're probably going to come in and match your energy. This is also really helpful in parenting. This is not a parenting podcast specifically, but I've always got nuggets of parenting. You come at your toddler really aggressive, they're going to come back at you really aggressive. However, even if your toddler comes at you aggressive, if you choose not to match their energy and you choose to bring it really calm, they get thrown off and are more likely to start to match your energy. Basically, if you can sort of, scheme the system a little bit, right, you can get your toddler to not, maybe not yell at you quite so much. But norm of reciprocity, I think that also sometimes making friends is about being a friend first. That if you be the friend that you want, be like, reach out to somebody. If you're like, oh, I just wish somebody would text me and ask, how am I doing today? text people and ask how they're doing today. Tell somebody, hey, I'm thinking about you and I really hope you're having a good day. Just because. And then as you start to build those things, they will likely come back to you because of this. And so sometimes even with that norm of reciprocity, that means going first. That means taking that first step out. So whether it's smiling, whether it's sending a text message, whether it's, following up with somebody that you've connected with in a group to be like, hey, I really enjoyed connecting with you, but that's getting a little bit ahead. Let's talk about groups. Yes. Let's talk about connecting with groups.
Well, but I wanted to stop because you said texting. I said first step, smile. It's in practice. Second step, if you are scared to make friends, texting or sending a DM is a pretty safe second step for people because then you are there's less likely to have face the rejection. Now, somebody could come back and not answer you back. My sweet Aunt Mary, since I saw her last January, a year ago, January, she texts me every single day. Good morning. I love you. Good morning. I love you. There will sometimes go 2 or 3 days that I don't reply back. She still texts me every day. Good morning. I love you. And when I get the text, you guys, I swear she's copying and pasting. This morning, the text came in, good morning. Second text, love you. And I'm like, whoa, you didn't copy and paste. I still feel loved by my Aunt Mary. So texting is a good first step, as well as sending a direct message. If you don't have somebody's cell phone number, you're probably Facebook friends with somebody. I, the other day, was sitting next to somebody at church and said, can I be your Facebook friend? So that I wanted to send her a message, encouraging message. So, but again, I'm getting ahead. Groups. One of the simplest ways to actually make new friends is to put yourself in the collision course of seeing people, right? So that
you actually have to interact with humans.
You have to actually go where humans are, right? I think if you can look at things, what are your interests? I actually read one thing that said their step was before that to make a list of things that you're interested in, which could actually help you to be able to do this next step, which is like find something you're interested in and join a group related to that interest. So that can be sports. Some people like tennis. It can be something like book club, if you're a little more low key. It can be, there is an app called Meetup where you actually, if you like hiking or you like biking or you like walking, all of those things, you like animals. So you can join a group. Alternatively, you can also volunteer with an organization that also has your interests. Both of those things put you on collision course to actually interact with other humans. Which leads us to the next step. Once you're in the group, Sami, now what do you do?
So kind of want to tell a story first before I go into like what to do with the group.
Yeah.
So last year for me was a very difficult year. My pregnancy with Peter was just like physically one of the most challenging things I've ever gone through. I ended up getting COVID pneumonia while I was pregnant. There were so many different things that happened. Like it just was really, really hard. While I was laying in bed recovering from pneumonia, it actually was about that, where you're just like, I can't really do anything other than sit here and think or sleep. I really reflected on the fact that I have a lot of friends in long distance relationship, or like have long distance friendships, and I don't have as many friends here in person. I had a lot of friends in college that I maintained, that I did a lot of very intentional things to keep up with, and then everybody's moved away. And so now I'm trying to figure out like, okay, well, who are the people that I can talk to here, or who I can call to come sit with me, or help me with these things. And I'm not saying I have no one, I just have less. So I decided, I was like, I'm going to pick 2 people because that's what I have capacity for right now to invest in. And I literally like wrote down their names. I was like, these 2 women in my life. One was a brand new neighbor. She actually moved in last February, right next door to me. I moved in December. She moved in February. And probably by like March or April, we had met. And I was like, all right, I'm going to become friends with her. And then in addition, there was a new person at our church that I was like, I really connected with her. We just had a couple conversations. And I was like, I'm going to invest in these two friendships. That was all it was. In deciding, here are two people. There are a lot of different people I could have chosen. And there's a lot of different things that could have happened. And I did what I could with the capacity that I had. I picked two people and I was like, all right, what does it look like to invest in a friendship? I'll let people in behind the curtain of what's in my brain. Sometimes I really hate sharing this metaphor because I don't want people to think Sammy's just really transactional with friendships and this is all that is. But take it for what it's worth. In my brain, there is a pantry of friendship. It's the pantry of friendship. It really is. I just like walk into it. It's a walk-in pantry. It's pretty large, which is nice. There are a lot of jars in this pantry, and every jar represents a relationship that I have. I have so many marbles every day that I can drop into the jars. As I add more marbles to the jars, the friendship builds. It's sort of an investment. There are some friends that I have that there are so many marbles in the jar. If I ever have to make a withdrawal and I have to ask things of them or like really need a big favor or even a big critical moment, you don't even notice the amount of marbles going in and out of the jar. I also have other friendships that are newer. They're like, oh yeah, I've got a couple marbles dropped in there, You can kind of tell this is a new one and maybe a little bit more fragile of a relationship. So what I decided to do was how I particularly while I was not feeling well and physically not my best, I only had so many marbles that I could invest. I took those marbles and I very intentionally invested in these two friendships. I went for coffee with a friend. I went on walks around the neighborhood with my neighbor. I would send text messages of like, hey, I'm just thinking about you. This is over the course of 6 months. This was not a overnight thing. This was long time. Each day, like each week, can I invest 1 or 2 marbles in a friendship? It can sometimes be depressing in some ways to think about things like, oh, cool, I can make a friend 6 months from now. But on the other side, like if you decide not to do anything 6 months from now, you won't have a friend. Like either you don't have a friend right now, and then 6 months from now, you don't do anything and you still are in the same place, or you could invest slow growth into building friendships, and slow steps can help grow that relationship with each other. So all of that to circle back around, when you join a group, are there people you connect with? Are there people that you're like, oh man, I would love to go have a conversation with them. I'd love to learn more about their life. I want to just sort of do life things with somebody else. Decide I want to invest in this relationship, and then figure out what does that look like for you? What's your capacity level? What are small but attainable steps you can take to invest in that friendship over time? And then over time, the friendships will grow and will develop from there, particularly if you take this perspective kind of across your life. Like it doesn't just have to be one single friend, because sometimes things don't work out. Sometimes somebody moves. One of these two friends last year almost moved across the state. And I was like, what am I going to do? I'm going to be down to one friend now. Like, oh my gosh, which is not true. I was like, no, I can't have more long distance friendships. I have so many of them, but that's beside the point. Having more people, a bigger social support net is not a bad thing. And also you don't need like dozens of friends. I'll also throw that out there. Like, I think I probably have like 4 people that I would call like my best friends that I go like super, super deep with. And that's okay. You don't have to have dozens and dozens of friends. Those are my thoughts. That was a long ramble. I don't know where you jump in, Angela.
All right. So I'm going to translate that to answer my question. So when you join a group, the first thing you're going to do is find the person that you find interesting. So what you're saying is the group that you joined was church, and you noticed somebody interesting at church. And the other group that you joined was your neighborhood, really, kind of, sort of.
Yeah.
We'll call it your neighborhood, which is also a collision course of meeting people, right? If you notice that your neighbor walks out to their mailbox every day at the same time, you could walk out to your mailbox. You could start taking walks, after daylight savings time, take a walk in your neighborhood. You might get on a collision course to people. So you first joined the group church, joined the group neighborhood, and then you were intentional.
Mm-hmm.
And the first step that you did when you asked the person from church, hey, can we grab coffee? Is that kind of how it started?
Yeah, really.
And you just were like, hey, want to grab coffee sometime? And how did she react?
Oh my gosh. Thrilled, delighted. I think that she was very eager to go to coffee with me. And I think sometimes when in our head, we're like, oh, well, if I ask somebody to coffee or if I ask them to go hang out, they're going to say no. Like, why would they say yes to me? They would say yes to you because we all want friendships, because we all want that connection. And everybody, there are times where I think somebody's busy, somebody's season of life may not lend itself to go get coffee, but the desire to connect with others, that's there for all of us, even if seasons of life don't align. I think that's also something else, is that like, finding somebody who might be in a similar walk of life, who might have similar kind of schedule restraints or scheduling considerations. Not to say that friends can only be limited to that, but that helps when you're reaching out about those things.
You make a good point of something I read that said, assume people will like you. And I was like, oh, wow. And that kind of reduces the fear of rejection if you just assume people will like you. And that's what you did, is like assumed that this person was going to like you. What about when you talked to your neighbor? How did that conversation get going?
So weirdly, with my neighbor, there felt like there was a little bit more risk. I was a little bit slower on building this friendship because it felt like if something went wrong with the girl at church, if she's like, oh my gosh, how can't believe that she asked me out for coffee, whatever, I just avoid her at church. I don't have to worry about it. Like I can find ways to navigate around that. With my neighbor, there did feel like I had just a slower approach, because if something got messed up, like, well, crap, we live next to each other, that could get weird. And so it was definitely, I would notice her outside with her kids, and I would rush my kids outside to go play at the same time. She might listen to this and might hear that I definitely did that at times, where I'd be like, no, go out and play, like make a connection, so that I can make a connection.
What's funny is that now I know your neighbor, and she will be like, what? Sammy was nervous. I think that's how your neighborhood will react, is like they'll be shocked for you to admit that. So I think it is good for you to admit that, because you and I are both extroverts, and it does feel a little bit nerve-wracking to, and thank you for addressing the risk, because while what Jack Canfield says can be helpful, there is risks involved, if it gets awkward with your neighbor. But I mean, how much more awkward can it be living on a cul-de-sac and we never talk to our neighbors, right?
Right.
Like, I've lived across the street from my neighbor for 18 years. Only in the last 3 months do I have her phone number and became her Facebook friends. That's weird.
Yeah. So I think, but that step with my neighbor was put myself on a collision course with her. Like, find a natural way to interact. Like, literally just, you're outside, I'll be outside. Like, how can I get myself outside? And slowly that led to like, oh, I think our boys went on a walk together, and we chatted more. And then I was like, hey, do you want to go on a walk sometime? I need to get out of the house. I need motivation. I don't think that it would be totally fair to not acknowledge your role in developing my relationship with my neighbor, because
oh shoot, I forgot I helped with that.
I was like, I want to acknowledge, it was around I think it was the week that Peter was born, with all of the hormones and the emotions and everything. And I'm like, I think I cried at some point that I don't have friends, which is like not true at all. And also, if you've ever had a baby, hormones are the worst. Like, they go everywhere and you don't know what thoughts are. And my mom had you had a
I
relationship with
did.
her. She worked at a bank.
I had figured out by that point that she used to be the assistant for the loan officer I had at a bank a long time ago at a different point in my life. So I was like, wait a minute, I know you. And the extent that you know the assistant to go, hey, can you process my payment? Hey, I need to make a draw. Like, it wasn't like we were besties, but.
So what did you do, Angela? Because you told me about this later. I didn't find out about it that exact moment, but what happened?
I forgot about this until you said it. I just sent her a Facebook note and just said, hey, you're closer than I am. This is something postpartum. She had 2 babies. And so, postpartum is tough. Can you just help me keep an eye on her? Check in with her. It's a little easier for you to pop in than it is for me to pop in. Can you just keep an eye on her? And so she was delighted because people want to be helpful. We always say it's better to give than to receive, but somebody has to receive. Otherwise, we're all giving and there's nobody to receive.
Right.
Too. So anyway,
so we did have some fuel.
I don't want to make a big deal about that I added fuel to the fire.
Well, but I do think that there's something I had sparks already. I had, added some kindling to the fire. I had the right conditions so that when you added just a little bit of fuel, everything caught. And that was really great. And I think sometimes where we can do that for ourselves, we can ask, hey, I really need a friend right now. You've started to build that relationship. You have added the kindling. You've put some marbles in the jar. And then make an ask. And I'm not talking about oh, loan me money. Make an ask or I don't know, something weird like that. But you can be I really could just use somebody to talk to right now. I'm having a hard day. What's the risk at that point? You've already started to build the relationship. There's been this is not necessarily to somebody that I've texted them 10 times and they've never texted me back.
No. Yeah.
That's not the person. It's the person who has shown some going back and forth with each other.
On that neighbor and going back and forth, your neighborhood, I'm super impressed talking about intention. The girl that kind of started your neighborhood association. She has a really interesting philosophy and one that I think could be helpful to our listeners.
Right. So she's currently our POA president, but the neighborhood was probably built 8 or 9 years ago. I don't remember the exact date. When it was built, there are a lot of people who are still here in the neighborhood that were part of the original buyers. There was this one woman and she decided, I want to know my neighbors. I want to live in a neighborhood where we know each other. Yes. Didn't
she live in a neighborhood that she didn't know her neighbors? I think she had moved. I thought was what she had said. She'd had I lived somewhere for 4 years. I didn't know anybody. And I don't want that anymore. Yeah. So she literally got to a point where she said, I don't want this anymore. I'm going to do something about it.
So what she did that first year in the neighborhood, it was very convenient because everybody was brand new and you were starting fresh. But I don't think it has to happen just if you're starting new and fresh. Anyway, she hosted a neighborhood dinner at her house and just invited everybody in the neighborhood. And they had food, alcohol, all sorts of things, desserts, and just hung out. And there's now, this year is the 8th annual or 9th annual progressive dinner is happening in late April, where now we go to 3 or 4 different people's houses and you do cocktails at one house and appetizers at the next house and dinner and dessert. And it is just something that was sort of the start of let's all get together to know each other. And when someone new moves in, she really does an incredible job of meeting them, welcoming them, and then connecting them with somebody similar walk of life or similar things. She's ooh, this is a person that you need to know. Let me make sure that you two are connected. Let me make sure you guys have each other's phone numbers. And I think there's something about that. Even if she doesn't have to go be everyone's best friend, she's I'm going to find you a friend in the neighborhood. We have enough different people here that you can find people that you can connect with if you choose to connect with them.
Yeah, that brings to mind when you said dinner that I remember when Lexi was graduating, high school. And at that time, the only couple friends we really hung out with, we had all these soccer friends all these years that we had traveled with. And then suddenly the only people that we were hanging out with were you and Chris. And I was like, I want couple friends. I want people that I can vacation with. And so I thought about my friends, and I weirdly had like 3 other couples that all loved baseball. I don't love baseball. Like, I will go to a baseball game with you if you will let me drink beer, eat hot dogs, and talk to you the whole time. Like, I just look at it as a venue for me to sit and chat with you for 3 hours. I don't love baseball. Don't hate me. But these 3 friends did love baseball. And so, or at least 2 of them did. And so I said, hey, I need friends. And so I hosted dinner and invited them. And I'm like, let's do a supper club. And we did it for probably almost a year. And then we did one trip to St. Louis all together. And it was funny because this person brought a couple, this person brought a couple. So at one point we ended up with like 6 couples, and not everybody could come every month. Anyway, and then the pandemic hit and we haven't started back. And we've been saying we need to start this back. And it's very fun watching the people. They were not all close friends before, and now they've become friends. So start something yourself.
Be the leader. Go first.
Yeah.
So we've shared a lot of stories about different things that you and I have done. Can we maybe summarize, give the bullet points on some things versus the full stories, if you wanted to kind of recap a little bit of how to make friends?
Well, we've talked about some of the how, like, okay, join a club, look at your neighbors, start a supper club, that sort of thing. But there are a couple of things that you also need to do and kind of your way of showing up in a friendship. I know that many of us are afraid to be vulnerable and to kind of talk about ourselves. That feels really scary. But that is friendship.
So I have a thought I want to I don't know, it's because sort of been tumbling around this idea of how do we make friends as adults? And I was like, well, what's the opposite? How do we make friends as kids? And sometimes, we talk about, you just said talking about ourselves can feel really scary. But there's something about childhood friendships that's like, do you want to play with me on the playground? Sure. Now we're best friends. Like, hey, I like the color of your shoes. I like the color of your shirt. Now we're best friends. And there is something kind of just so innocent and sweet. And there's an unassuming nature of it, as well as, I don't know, it doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't mean anything else. If somebody says, I don't like your shirt, or no, I don't want to go down the slide with you, it doesn't mean anything as a kid. It really just means they don't want to go down the slide with me. And I wonder if, sort of as adults, if we can embody that and embrace that childlike desire for friendship, will that help us be a little bit less afraid as we approach this? And will that help us just give us a little bit more courage to say, hey, I like your shirt. It looks nice. Want to be friends?
Well, yeah, because as children, the way you make friends is collision course, right? Like, so many of the friends you make are because you're in class with them, you're on the playground with them, you're on a sports team with them, and those do. So I think there's a couple of things that you can learn about that same idea of, like, yeah, just simplifying it and experiencing the joy of friendship. Final thoughts. I want to talk about my earrings because, I just got back from Costa Rica and I made a big deal. I wanted to go to the farmer's market in Jaco. And the first week I went and, I visit all the booths, and it's clear that most of the people don't speak English. And so it's very hard to just chit chat like I like to do. I figured out that part of what I like to do with farmers market is chit chat. And then I stumbled upon this booth that had used books, jewelry, and Susie spoke English. And so I struck up a conversation with her, started with smiling. She smiled back. And then over the 4 weeks that we were there, every week I would just check in and she would say, oh, what's on your agenda this weekend? Because we, talked about that we worked during the week and that we shared. And I started just sort of sharing the simple things. And then she shared, oh, I had some friends come in town. We went on this coffee plantation tour. And anyway, so the last week we were there, I went and made sure and bought some earrings. So I had a memory from my friend Susie and said, I'm not. This is our last week. And she's like, oh, well, you guys, when you come back next time, come check me out. And I'm like, oh, we probably won't be back to Hako, already done that. But then weirdly, that was on Thursday night. I saw her 2 more times out in town. And she came up to me and gave me her card. She said, I know you don't plan on coming back, but I wanted you to have my contact information in case you do. So it really can be as simple as chatting and just being friendly. And if you practice that in scenarios, I kind of joke, there's a line in my book where I'm like, literally practice in stores because people are paid to be nice to you. And I know not every store is nice, but you can practice just chatting with people. And then in next episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about maintaining friendship.
Yeah, I'm really excited for the conversation and just sort of what happens next after you have started the friendship, maybe some things are going, and then maintaining those friendships, those lifelong friendships, all of those things. So if this episode was helpful for you at all, or if you just enjoyed it, just really had a good time listening, share it with a friend. Maybe use this as your icebreaker to connect with someone. We would love to hear how this impacted you. So send us an email. Join our email list if you want to hear some behind the scenes information and just a little bit more about how we're thinking about these things. But for now, we'd love for you guys to go and be freaking awesome.